Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. Welcome back. I know you all are thinking next week is Christmas, and it absolutely is. So much has transpired over the course of this year, and we are here toward the end of it, getting ready to prepare for the new year. 2025 is right around the corner. Do want to take a moment before we get started today to just, send up prayers for yet another school shooting in Madison, Wisconsin. A teacher and a teenager were killed, unfortunately. And just in this holiday season, let's make sure that you all are taking good care of yourselves and you're around people who are loving and kind and thoughtful, and that you hug folks. And that you take the best care of yourself that you can, because unfortunately, there's just so much that could happen at any given moment. I'm sure that parents and spouses and loved ones didn't think that yesterday would turn out the way that it did. So just want to send those prayers up. Wanted to just take a moment to do that. So we have been talking about, and I do still think it's relative and relevant. Hope in humanity, and as much as there are things like school shootings that happen, there's absolutely a lot of good that happens in the world as well. And, our hearts ache anytime painful things happen, particularly to people who just were on their way at school, enjoying their day, learning, and you want our kids to be safe. But as we are talking about this Hope for Humanity series, we've been discussing compassion, which I definitely always think is needed. Uh, the power of music, joy, games, arts and crafts, hope, and I definitely think that hope piece is really powerful, because otherwise you can kind of fall into some despair just thinking about random acts of violence or calculated acts of violence that occur. So today, and I think it's fitting. I was asking myself this morning if I still wanted to continue on with this topic, but I do. What I feel like is one of the greatest foundations of humanity, and that is love. I absolutely believe that if we were more loving toward each other, if we were more connected to each other, then that would decrease our capacity to be violent toward each other. I get asked a lot what it means to be loving. What is a loving relationship? And I think too, as we embark upon this time of year where Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, love is a good topic to hit on as well. So I will tell you, much like I did last week when we talked about, or the week before when we talked about compassion, that love is an action word. There are a lot of different types of love. And I know that often we end up focusing largely on romantic or passionate love, eros. But I want to talk a little bit about the different types of love, and then we'll talk about what loving relationships look like. Can we do that? All right, I appreciate you. So romantic love, because that's the one that's the most popular after we get through Christmas and New Year's, where we go, Valentine's Day, where we focus a lot on romantic loves. But the romantic love is considered to, yes, be that passionate, affectionate, physical love that we have toward people. Now, the challenge with this romantic kind of passionate love is that sometimes we can get consumed in it. And particularly as we are dealing with insecurities and wounds that we have, where maybe we didn't get a chance to have the type of loving relationships that we deserve, particularly in childhood. We've talked a lot about those first several years determining our foundation for a lot of things, our safety and our security, how we cope, how we're able to attach to people, how we are predisposed to think about the world and our perception of what is possible for us, our self worth, our self competency, a lot of these different components. And so, what ends up happening sometimes with this kind of romantic, passionate love, how it can go awry. I know that you all have read about, seen on TV, movie screen, or maybe known someone in an abusive relationship. And what ends up happening is that because we can kind of be consumed about having this love and what we've learned about how to keep love can affect how we express that love. So if you grew up and you saw violence, for example, if you saw a relationship that was very controlling, then you think that that's what love is supposed to look like. Also, if you've ever been abandoned and felt like people left you and weren't there for you, there can get to be almost this paranoia, if you will, that other people will leave you as well. And so the ways to keep yourself safe, sometimes when we have that kind of orientation, is to block away other potential threats to someone taking this love, whether that be a friendship or a romantic dating relationship. Or we can be very possessive of people, and we can get very jealous, right? Because when there's a lot of passion, there's that potential for jealousy, that potential to be able to see through these eyes of envy and not wanting to share this person that we love, not wanting people to look at them. And so we'll tell them to do things so that they won't be as visible to people, or at least in our mind. We reduce the amount of contact they have with other people. We can want to know where they are at all times, and the scanning the room. February, I talk a lot about intimate partner violence, particularly as it comes to our young people, because that is a month where we pay particular attention to those kinds of challenges in our early dating relationships. So yeah, this kind of love can be really needy, independent. It can be very strong and powerful, and deeply connected as well. But we know how most things are not just linear, right? They're on these poles. And so we always talk about, well, how did a person get to that point of killing someone they love? Or how do you abuse someone you love? If you say you love them, how can you treat them that way? And that's because of those poles, right? So this strong desire can come with a lack of control for some people. That feels like it's more emotionally driven than that part of our brains, that frontal lobe that gives us our good concrete thinking skills and allows us to be rational. Sometimes it turns off because of that passionate love, and we can again become possessed and obsessed with people. And so it has the potential to be these very strong sexual connections and this sexual attraction. And sometimes people in that place will do things out of that passion that isn't necessarily helpful and loving. Right, to the person that they're with. But then on the other side of that, it can be sparks in chemistry and all of these wonderful things. Right, and we'll talk about a little bit later how to move in that direction when it comes to romantic, passionate love. But I do think it's just important for us to understand that all of us have a potential. The best parts of us and the worst parts of us, they're all in there. And so, depending on your trigger and which one you're nurturing, either one of those can come out. And so, again, as we talk about being the person who's responsible for choosing how we're going to show up and behave, it's important for us to understand where some of our origins for how we view romantic love, that passionate, erotic love, come from, because that can kind of help us, particularly if we are struggling with how to connect with people in romantic relationships. Then we have the more playful, connected, but a little bit more playful. The fun might be those if you had a summer crush fling, you went on a cruise and made a connection with somebody, and you all just really enjoyed each other. It tends to just be more casual. It can be short lived or it can be longer lived, but it is that part that usually. Burns really bright, but then it fades really quick, because it's considered to be sometimes more of the puppy love or the lustful kind of love. And so sometimes it doesn't really have a huge anchor by which to maintain, because outside of the fun and enjoyment, then sometimes it doesn't have anything. Now, it can grow. For some people, that's how their relationships start off, and then it grows into other different types of love. But I think all of us have had those people that we were just, I don't know, really excited about. Maybe you just enjoyed them and it felt so easy, but that didn't necessarily translate over into anything long term, friendship or a committed dating relationship. Friendships, speaking of which, is another type of love that we have. And when we think about friendship, talk a lot to people about what exactly is friendship, because I think we use that term pretty loosely when it comes to relationships with people that may have been in our lives. But a friendship is something in which we are mutually adding to each other. We have taken the time to get to know and understand each other. It is based in trust and dependability. So when we talk about who are the people that are going to show up for you, those are your friends. It can transform into other types of love over time. We definitely know that people who have been best friends have ended up dating, though it doesn't have to. It is a type of love that can stand on its own. Friends end up being those people that you can confide in and not have to worry about it being thrown back in your face. They are the people when you need a wise mind, some insight, to be able to sort through things. They're able to give you an honest assessment because, of course, their care for you and their value of you is they want you to be the healthiest version of yourself that you can be. And so the friendship ends up growing over time as we go through losses, as we see births and weddings, and as we see progressions in careers, and even as we see things change in our lives, our abilities change, and us deciding we want to move in different directions, as we go through divorces, as we go through the heartbreak of losing loved ones. Like that friendship can deepen because, again, that understanding and that connection continues to grow. So friendships you have to continue to pour into, which is why I tell people a lot of times they're calling people friends that they may have had relationships with in elementary school, but there hasn't been any connection since then. You don't keep up with each other. You don't connect and talk with each other. You don't know what's going on in each other's lives. A friend ought to be able to tell you something about a person beyond what is visible on their social media pages, beyond the basic information that you could glean from them if you just happen to show up somewhere where they are. But knowing the intimate, deep parts of people, often things that may be a struggle, and their passions, their joys. That's what friendship is about. So some of you have acquaintances that you're calling friends. And so as you're thinking about, and we'll talk a little bit about expectations later on, as you're thinking about why you're disappointed with people is because you're putting a label onto a relationship that's not actually true of what the relationship is. It might have been at some point, or it may have been even from your perspective, that type of relationship. But again, with friendship, it's mutual. So we both see each other in this way, not just one of us. as we talk about friendships, of course, where does that lead? To family relationships, our familial relationships, because some of us, our friends are our family. But also because sometimes our family gets extended, and we add our friends, the people that have been a part of our lives so long. Yeah, they come over to the family gatherings too, because they've been with you. Some of you have had friends through childhood that are still your friends today. And so your family is their family. And so we've kind of blended and merged over time. Family relationships are a little bit different because the other relationships that we talk about, there is an intentional act, if you will, that causes these relationships to be. I see a person that's attractive, and then we get to this playful love. I spend some more time with you. I decide I want to take that to a different level. It becomes this romantic love. I meet you in kindergarten, and we become friends, right? So there's an intentional investment that occurs before the relationship actually develops. Familial relationships are often hardwired, if you will, because they can be instant simply because we're related. So, for those of you that have had children, you will say that love for your child sometimes is as soon as you even know that they're in the womb, or the first time you feel that flutter, that kick. The first time you see their little precious face when they're born, like it's an instant love. It's a different type of love than a lot of people experience in their other types of loving relationships. And I think part of it is that you know that this being is an extension of you. And so it becomes a relationship of love out of our connection via family, our familiarity, or the fact that we played with each other over the summers as cousins, or as siblings. We grew up in the same house together, and so it's relative based on sometimes proximity. It can be relative based on, because as we know, not all siblings necessarily grew up in the same home, and so sometimes when you don't grow up in the same home, it can affect how the relationship evolves because you're not maybe seeing each other as much. And then we have other people who make intentional efforts. We didn't grow up in the same home, but you were over at my house and I was over at your house, right? Because our parents made sure that we still got a chance to connect even when we didn't live in the same house. And so there was that concerted effort to be able to be present with each other that allowed the relationship to grow. And this is also in these familial relationships why you'll see a variation in what they look like, because sometimes we're connected and sometimes we're not. Sometimes people have wounds that they are dealing with that interfere with them being able to be loving. And so those relationships end up being more of obligation, because you are this in my family, then you should treat me in this way. But it's not a loving relationship. Or it could be like, that's Nana, but Nana was already fairly old by the time I came on the scene. And so it's not like I've spent a lot of time with her because she may have been in a nursing home, but I love her because she's my Nana, right? So she's a pillar of the family. And so as you can see, again, just like we were talking about the passionate love, there can be poles to that too. So it does not necessarily mean that just because you're family, that's going to be a loving, close relationship. In fact, those relationships can be very strained, and they can be very distant depending on who shows up in the relationship, because in addition to you, me, and my family, you still got all these components that make you who you are as a person. And which is why sometimes it can be tough in families where people are like, oh, they're family no matter what. And you're like, I don't consider that person to be family if they've hurt me, particularly if this is an ongoing hurt, or it was a very extensive hurt, or they are a person that I consider to still be an active threat. Like I don't want to be in the space with them, which can make those familial relationships very, very strained sometimes and complicated. But also that familial love can feel different again than any other type of love because of those dynamics. when we talk about that agape love, or what some would describe as unconditional love, so this love is what is supposed to come out of us having a belief in a higher power. Our connection, we just talked about the birth of Jesus Christ coming, our connection as followers of Christ, our connection as people who believe in God, Yahweh, Jehovah, our connection to the earth and the people around us, and seeing them as extensions of myself, right? So it is probably one of the most purest forms of love, because it is considered to be that spiritual love that goes along with wanting people to be well and healthy, and not one that's predicated upon you being perfect. You just show up and you're loved simply because you're another human being. I see you as a brother and sister in this connection I have to our faith-based institution, or that we are all born of one race, which is the human race. Right. So you'll see a lot of this kind of evolving of how we look at each other. And so I wouldn't hurt you because you're a part of me and we're connected, in that agape kind of unconditional love. But it also is just where sometimes a lot of just joy and happiness comes from, because you just are appreciative of the things around you. So you could, find love and have that warming of your heart when you see the sunrise and how beautiful that might look. Like how blessed it is to have come to another day. Or seeing a loving interaction between a parent and a child could bring you joy, or a cute puppy, right? Just appreciative of the things around you. And often you'll see that people that have kind of that agape unconditional love in their spirit tend to be happier people overall. They tend to be more well adjusted and not as stressed. And they also tend to just be more connected and more insightful and aware of people. Like they just see through a different lens. Then we have self love, because we cannot talk about love without talking about us loving ourselves. That's an important part of having a loving relationship, is to know that you matter. A lot of people struggle with self love. It can be much easier for people to focus on others and to feel that others are deserving of love, but feel like we're not. And that does tend to be connected to our self worth. It makes it, I think, sometimes feel like we're being selfish or arrogant if we love ourselves. However, when you're talking about wellness and wholeness and connection, all of that is just as important for you to see yourself as it is for you to see in other people. It often is connected with confidence, higher levels of self esteem, but it also is connected to self compassion. I know I'm going to make some mistakes, and I'm going to realize that me making a mistake doesn't mean I'm a mistake. And so I'm still able to love myself in my challenges and my struggles, in as much as I love myself in my triumphs and my accomplishments. Self love is one of those that does have to be taught. I think some of them, you will just kind of experience just over time as you connect with people, they grow. But self love is something that we have to be intentional about, and have to make sure that we're doing things that nurture it, because at times in your life, you can very much not be very loving toward yourself. And when you're not loving toward yourself, that usually ends up equating to some self destructive behaviors. We have what is called a practical type of love. I've talked a little bit about Sternberg's theory of love, which talks about different types of intimacy, commitment, passion, and how having those things in various combinations create certain types of relationships, loving relationships. And so that practical relationship, or that practical love, if you will, is kind of consistent with that committed type of love, if you look at Sternberg's theory of love, which essentially is like we have gotten past the physical things, and that doesn't mean that passion isn't there, but it means that passion isn't the primary core anymore. And so there's still this romantic love that is present. This practical love is often love associated with couples, either who have been married or who have been together for long periods of time. And it's transcended some of the more aesthetic physical needs that might have been present early on. So no matter the weight gain, no matter, how much sex we may be having, no matter if you have been diagnosed with an illness and we've been working through that, no matter maybe you lost your job and we've had to navigate through that experience, or we've had losses together, we've been able to build this foundation that allows us to be able to have compassion toward each other. We now are compatible on all these different levels. Our relationship is steady, it's consistent, it's congruent. There is more of an emphasis on us kind of building and supporting and nurturing each other. And so, the enjoyment can still be there, but really what's most important is the connection. This is a relationship that I would describe as a partnership, right? And so I don't want that necessarily to be confused with an arranged marriage. It's like, oh, it's practical in that way. Like we would be a good fit. We should get together. Our families bring us together and we grow to love each other. This practical relationship actually comes from the place of we chose each other. We went through all of the passion, the romance, the building, the friendship, all of those aspects of love. And because of those things, we've learned to love ourselves. Because of those things, now we have this enduring, practical love that allows us to not get so caught up in the small things. So when you didn't put the cap back on that toothpaste, I just laugh because you hadn't been putting that cap on the toothpaste for 15 years. So those are the kind of things where we don't sweat the small stuff, where we choose to ignore those little things in favor of the things that bring us joy about this partnership. When you can look back, couples that have been married 50 years, how wonderful, 40 years, 30 years, 20 years. Nowadays, shoot, if you can make it to 10 or 5, like that is a huge milestone, because it can be so easy for there to be things that come in and can really destroy a relationship. And so this is the type of growth that often people aspire to when they pick their forever partner, is that kind of love. Though it takes a lot of work to get there. And sometimes we just realize we don't have the skill set to be able to make that happen. So let's talk about that. Let's get into the skill set. What does that look like? Like, what does being loving look like? How do I get to these types of love? What is a reflection that I'm loving? Like, what to other people, what would they see if I'm actually being loving? I will tell you that your foundation for love is very, very important. Oftentimes, we do not have realistic expectations of ourselves, much less of other people. And there can be kind of this fantasized, and unfortunately, social media and movies dramatize love. And so people think that love is going to be this butterflies in my stomach, swept off my feet, passion, person whose body is like a goddess, or a man whose stature, he's tall and he's fit and he's perfect teeth and he's strong and he knows how to build a house with his bare hands and create a car. Like just it's a woman who cooks all the time and attends to you, and you come home and she's got the tub waiting for you to soak your feet, and right, and so that there's just nothing but bliss, and that we don't have truthfully an understanding of the foundation for what maintains a healthy relationship, which is things like being able to communicate with each other and being able to be honest with each other about what our boundaries are, creating trust. Like, these are the foundations. And so because we don't have that when we go into a relationship. And when you're new in a relationship, it's passionate, you're excited, you do all the stuff, you not sleeping because you talking to this person up all night. But then you get to a point where you can't maintain these things. Like, I got to get some rest, so I'm not going to be able to function at work. I'm not doing well at school because I'm over here spending all my time with you and not studying, knowing I need all this time to study and be able to be successful academically. And so when that wears off, then a person feels like, well, you're not doing what you used to do. Like, what is going on with that? Well, that's because I didn't really present an accurate depiction of who I was and what I could maintain when I first met you. And so often we are building our relationships on foundations that are simply not honest. And so once a person realizes, like, oh, you said you were in a different position than you actually are, then the resentment can build up. So when we talk about loving relationships, that means I have to take an honest assessment of who I am, where I am, what I can offer, what I value in terms of relationships, and what I would like for that to look like for me to have whatever type of loving relationship that looks like for you. And I out the gate communicate that to a person instead of withholding information because I want this person to invest in me first before I really let them know who I truly am, because I don't want them to reject me or decide to do something different in this relationship. And so I mislead them. Right. So being honest does mean, yeah, some people may say to you, hey, I'm not interested in that. But being in a loving relationship is based on that mutual respect and understanding and honesty. And so that's an important part of it, which is, speaks to our boundaries. And I get a lot of questions for people about boundaries, like, well, people can make up whatever boundary they want to. Am I supposed to respect every boundary? What if that's not something I want? When we are talking about being in loving relationships, that does mean that there is going to be some healthy compromise. But I do want to be clear that there's a difference between a healthy compromise and an ultimatum. So if you tell someone, for example, you want to be in a committed monogamous relationship, the other person doesn't want to be in a committed monogamous relationship, and you tell them in order for them to be with you, they have to accept that you want to see multiple people. And if they love you, then they should be willing to give you that. That's an ultimatum, right? Like, people ought to be able to decide for themselves what is healthiest for them. So if they want to be in a committed monogamous relationship, then they absolutely deserve to be in a committed monogamous relationship, and not to have someone manipulate that foundation for them to get that investment, because it's harder for us to leave a relationship once we've invested, even if it's not healthy anymore. And so that speaks to that honesty. If you are going to stand on who you are as a person, then you communicate out the gate what that looks like. And so for someone that wants committed monogamous and you don't, then you don't need to be dating people that want committed monogamous. Nor does it mean you can manipulate the situation to, I want to have multiple relationships, but you can't, right? Because that's not allowing people to be able to navigate their own boundaries. And I know this is a huge issue when it comes to navigating sex, navigating finances. And again, this is not therapy. And so these are things you need to be talking about. Here's your plug for therapy. You need to be talking about with a couples therapist. But that's one of those things that allows you to be able to figure out if this is a person I want to move forward with before we go ahead and make all these investments. And then we're frustrated with each other. And then people will say, well, that's why I cheated. Now, you chose to cheat. Nobody forces you to do anything, because you could have made some different decisions. And I think a lot of times there is some kind of misunderstanding about people's orientations. There are men and women who want to have multiple partners. Nothing wrong with that. But to say to someone, well, you should expect that I am X, when you entered into a relationship with different boundaries, is not fair to them, and it takes away their consent, right? Y'all know I'm a big consent kind of person. So when we're talking about negotiating those boundaries, they should be things that are allowing us as a couple to work toward our goals. They should be things that allow us to be healthy and well versions of ourselves. And that speaks to the sacrifice, not starvation. Love is sacrifice. Like, you are not going to want to get up and be pleasant every morning, especially after y'all had an argument, right? But what do? We discuss that no matter what happens, we're going to always wake up and be loving toward each other, and we're going to work through whatever challenges we have. That's a sacrifice, because today I ain't thinking about you, but I made a commitment to you that I would honor us being pleasant as we're working through things. So that's a sacrifice. But it shouldn't be a starvation. I should not have to go and be somebody different. I shouldn't have to mute myself. I shouldn't have to disconnect and dissociate in order for me to be able to have a sacrificial, loving relationship with you. That sacrificial, loving relationship is that I show up for you in loving ways, even when I may not necessarily want to. But that doesn't mean that I just do whatever you want me to do, and I lose myself doing it. And so that's that balance, that fine line that I think a lot of times people struggle with. So you're my spouse, you should have sex with me. Um, that is a dangerous game to play, because there are so many different things that factor into what is going on with a person: trauma history, physical conditions, medications, right? And so instead of understanding what's going on with my partner and us being able to navigate like how we're going to work through that in a way that allows us to have a compromise, then here I come with the ultimatum where you're not doing this, so I'm out. And I think a lot of times for us, we're using things as excuses to be able to engage in behaviors we want to engage in, which not loving. So when we're talking about loving relationships, that is a recognition and acknowledgement of who this person is. Seeing them, because again, if I said I chose to be in a relationship with you, then that means I need to fully understand with whom I'm getting into a relationship with. And I tell people oftentimes they would not have chosen to be in relationships with people if they had taken the time to get to know them first, instead of stopping with the passion and the fun, and not getting a understanding of how this person communicates. How do they deal with conflict? Can they offer a sincere apology? Are they willing to work on things? Some people will tell you, I don't want to go to therapy. I don't want to do any couples retreats. I don't want to do anything to gain skills. We grown. We ought to be able to figure it out. But if we're not figuring it out, then you just took away all the other options that we had to be able to figure it out. Which again speaks to that being able to follow through and being able to resolve things, which is part of a loving relationship as well, because that means we're learning how to navigate through conflict. Relationships are going to have conflict, but that doesn't mean they have to be hostile or abusive. It's no reason for you to be calling your partner out of their name. There's no reason for you to be putting your hands on your partner. If this is the kind of response that you have to being in a loving relationship, then you need to go back and really address, why am I looking at love in the way that love has to be violent? And for some people, they literally believe like, oh, you really love me when you put your hands on me. Oh, you really love me when you talk to me like that. And so that, again, that speaks to the foundation of where did you learn about where loving relationships come from and what they look like when you feel like a foundation is based in abuse or violence. And so being able to understand those dynamics is a part of learning and growth. And loving relationships are us actively participating in our own learning and growth, and also investing in my partner in their learning and growth. And that doesn't mean I have to make you feel bad about things that you need to grow in. Because again, like even if you're not cursing somebody out, if you're making them feel bad about themselves, you're saying demeaning things to them. That's not loving. And so being able to talk to people in ways, and that speaks to the tone, the volume, the body language, the nonverbals are a very important part of that. Like, how do you bring something to your partner when it's a challenge in the relationship that's in a loving manner? Because I'm addressing the behavior, I'm not attacking the person. And that does mean that we have to really work on our communication, which again is one of the areas where people really struggle, because a lot of times people don't know how to communicate directly and assertively around things that are uncomfortable for them. So there are a lot of areas where we're confident and outspoken and able to articulate ourselves well. But when it comes to people that we love and care about, sometimes that's hard. And then it looks like passive aggressive things, or the ultimatums come out, or I'm telling other people to have conversations with you, right? So loving behaviors doesn't necessarily mean that I'm out telling other folks about what's going on with us either, because then they're forming opinions and they're engaging in behaviors towards you because of things I've said, and then I move on and they still holding on to it, right? So I'm not going to tear you down. That's why we have a therapist. That's why we have some older couples that we talk to for guidance, so that we can keep that in this space of it being loving and constructive. I do think it helps when we have similar values and priorities, to be loving toward each other, because then when you say to me, hey, what's important to me is time together, and I say to you, what's important to me is to manage the finances. I don't have to worry about, I dealt a lot with parents that didn't make good financial decisions. I don't want to be, worried about being homeless out here with these kids, right? And so as we're able to have a similar foundation, then that allows us to be able to honor and value each other in our love language. How we spend time together, finances, discipline, how we structure the family in terms of family roles. Those tend to be the things that people struggle with the most. And when they're not as loving toward each other because they don't have those similar values and priorities. I do think it's also important for us to recognize that in our friendships too, things like trust, checking in, paying attention to a person, following up with them, in your interactions, just day to day interactions, smiling at people, greeting people. Like these are loving relationships too. It doesn't have to be about you being in a romantic relationship. It doesn't have to be about this being a friend. It could be coworkers, it could be church, it could be you just going to the grocery store. It warms my heart when people speak to me at the grocery store. We got out of a lot of that during the pandemic. People were wearing masks, and it's almost like we felt like if we looked at each other, we might get sick. So we just weren't even really acknowledging each other. And as we're coming out of that, I'm seeing people going back to speaking more, and I really always appreciate that. Those are the things that are loving, like stuff that you can do. You can make a decision about how you want to show up. I do also think that it's important for us when we're talking about loving relationships is to talk through decisions and choices. It can feel very disempowering and disconnected, and you can feel like you're not valued and important when a decision is made for the both of us, but I wasn't a part of that decision. And I know that people have different ways that they structure their families, structure their marriages, how your friendship looks. And this speaks to your negotiables and non negotiables as you're setting your boundaries, as you approach people and talk about who you are. But I think it's important for us to be able to navigate that in a way that allows people to feel as if their voice matters. Because one of the things that doesn't feel real loving is to feel like you're being shut down, and that you don't have the capacity to be able to articulate what your needs are, or to express interest, or to propel a decision in a given direction. And so I think that those are integral to any type of relationship, is being able to feel like you matter, and that your voice matters, and to be able to feel safe enough to share your voice. Like that's also very loving. I definitely also think it's very important for people to be able to let go of things and move on. We sometimes will just hold things hostage. We hold grudges. We will throw things back in your face. Though I said I forgave you, and when we moved on, like I'm still bringing that up, and I haven't. And I think it's really important for you to be able to do whatever your healing is. And you may need some individual therapy, even outside of your couples therapy, particularly if there has been some kind of rift in the relationship, that relationship with your friend or coworker or whatever it may be. And I think a lot of times we feel like, oh, well, that doesn't rise to the level of me needing therapy, but it may, because it may be a systemic kind of thing, that's rooted in some stuff that started earlier in your lifetime that's now manifesting itself in this relationship. So how you're approaching friendships, how you see your coworkers' behavior, how you approach dating, how you're looking at your family members, all could stem from that. And because you haven't addressed it, now it's kind of decayed, if you will, the roots for the other types of loving relationships. There is not a simple way to be loving, but I will tell you that to be loving is active. That is something that you have to practice and work on and be intentional about. And being loving also doesn't mean that you just get away with whatever you want, and a person is still going to love you because you say you love them, and you show up and you give them gifts, and you apologize, right? Being loving is something that you maintain, just like you maintain your vehicle, you maintain your home, so that when something is brought to your attention, being loving means that you address it, by figuring out the ways that you can stop from having the same hurtful behaviors keep occurring. All right, so it's not loving at all to just keep showing up in the same way and expecting people to be okay with that. And I think a lot of times that's what people confuse unconditional love with. Well, if you love me unconditionally, then you just know I'm gonna make mistakes and that's who I am. That's a cop out and that's gaslighting. No, you can show up and be a different person if you choose to be. Now, you choosing not to be lets me know that we have a different level of investment in our relationship. And that's when I think it is important for people to understand, which, we'll talk about at some point again in the future because relationships always come up when that a relationship isn't loving and you need to kind of move forward from it. But what I absolutely, my desire for you all is that you have loving relationships, that they're reciprocal, that they grow deep roots, and that they're able to stand the test of time. All right, be well.